Professor Imodino Young talks about transcendent thinking and how teenagers that engage in transcendent thinking have better well-being, life satisfaction, and achievements in their 20s. So what is transcendent thinking? It's when we consider the wider implications of situations, such as the ethical, systemic, and personal meaning that's attached to them, not just the facts and figures. Now, the impact of these reflections are much greater when heightened emotions are involved. And when I read this study, I thought about all of those missed opportunities when a teenage brain responds like a teenage brain's supposed to do. A lack of impulse control and a high emotional state, especially in classrooms. And these reactions often get in the way of exam learning, and children are excluded from the classroom or sometimes excluded from school. Real learning would be for us to make the most of these teachable moments and discuss the wider perspectives of the situations and events using transcendent thinking. I remember back to when I was coaching football, and towards the end of sessions there'd be games and you'd wait for a teachable moment, your opportunity to get players to consider different options and how they could have responded differently. Exactly the same thing applies here in schools. When there's a teachable moment, we should be looking to address that as a coaching opportunity and not simply exclude that young person because the behaviour has got in the way of learning. There's learning to be had from the emotions that are involved and the thinking that could be attached to them. In this sense, learning, as we know it, is getting in the way of healthy childhood development. And when these behaviours are addressed, very often it's to calm down, repair and restore, and it's not to strengthen or fortify. It's just to get back to where we were before and not use this as a moment of growth. We do a lot of this inner work with our enhanced matrix edition course. That program is designed for adults. And this research has got me thinking that we should be creating a version of this for children and young people, so we can really focus more on transcendent thinking and make the most of these teachable moments. This is a very interesting study from Washington State, and it's interesting because they use a similar model to our health mentors here in the UK. They have student assistant specialists, and they focus on behavioural health. That's a phrase I've not heard before. Our health mentors facilitate positive behaviour change, but looking at this study, it's very similar to improvements in behavioural health. So this study, it monitored the work of 60 of these student assistant specialists, and they were based in 88 schools in Washington State. They focused on identified pupils and worked with them to intervene early on a prevention basis. Again, very similar to our health mentors here in the UK. So what did they find? What was the outcome of this work? Well, they found significant improvements in students' hope, self-efficacy, social connectedness, and their coping strategies. There were also improvements in emotional well-being as well. But the reason I wanted to share this study is because they found that the outcomes produced were equivalent to those that are produced by more qualified practitioners who are also a lot more expensive. So this study showed a much lower cost model produced the same results. We're developing a project at a similar scale to this one, working with all of the local authorities in the West Midlands, where we'll be bringing together education, health and justice partners, as well as corporates who are socially minded and keen to operate in this space. We're currently seeking views and input on this project, so please let me know if you'd like to learn more or maybe even get involved. This is a recent study from 2024-25, and it involved over 80,000 students. What they found is that those students who went into year 7 reported lower levels of well-being and psychological safety as a result of the transition. They also found that self-efficacy levels dropped, and that's something that we focus on heavily here at Evolve. Some commentators talk about the behavioural policies of secondary schools not helping children's transition, and they also reference something called a hidden curriculum, where children from disadvantaged working class backgrounds are more at risk when it comes to year 6 to year 7 transition. Whilst I agree with this, I also think it's a little bit more nuanced and that there are other factors at play. We were involved in a study involving over 160 year 6 students approaching their secondary transition. But the difference here was that it was at an international school and it was a through school. So all of those students moving from year 6 to year 7 were in the same school. So some of the factors that they talk about in this study didn't apply. Certainly when it comes to disadvantaged working class backgrounds, and certainly when it comes to behavioural policy changes, because it was the same behavioural policy that they were experienced in year 6 and in year 7. The crucial thing here is that these students also reported drops in self-efficacy, psychological safety, and overall well-being when it came to their move from year 6 to year 7. So what could the reasons for this be? My view is that the impact of moving from one teacher in primary to many teachers in secondary has a much more profound impact than we realise. Secondary school teachers know their students through a very narrow lens of the subject, where primary school teachers have a much broader view. They know what those children are good at, and it may be non-academic things. Primary school teachers get to learn about the child and not just the pupil. The report talks about deficit narratives, and I like this expression because I think this is where many of the issues lie. To combat this, Evolve's developed a transition model where we share lots of information with secondary school teachers about what their incoming year 7 pupils are good at, what they like and what they don't like. And this will help to forge those relationships that are really important to build trust, to build safety, and to strengthen the rapport. Feel free to reach out if you'd like to learn more about how this model has worked in other schools, and I'd be happy to share case studies with you. I've shared details of this study before, but it's one of my favourites, and it was actually picked up by the Financial Times very recently as well. So, in the study, 572 German school children aged 6 or 7 completed 12 hours of working memory training. The researchers found those students who took part in the training had much better results in comparison to the control group, and this was in working memory exercises, but also transfer across into subject areas. However, what surprised the researchers is that they found there was a compound effect. Even with no further training, those students continued to develop their skills 6 months, 12 months, and most importantly, 3 years after the training ended. In this region of Germany, when students are aged 10 or 11, they get streamed into a higher academic track, a mixed ability track, or what they'd refer to as the vocational track. And the higher track is the one that's geared towards university access. And normally only 30% of students make it into this top stream. What they found is that the students who completed the cognitive training, 46% of them made it into that academic track, 16% higher than normal and what they were expecting. That shows a 50% greater likelihood of making it into the higher track following completion of the 12 hours of training. This is an important study for 2 reasons. First of all, it's linked cognitive improvements to academic success, but it's also tracked those academic improvements over a 3-year period. And you'll probably agree that the academic impact is quite significant, increasing from 30% chance to 46% chance. And this is only from a 12-hour time investment. In the UK here, the context is 33% of our students aged 16 struggle to get a good pass in English and maths. And that's been consistent for over a decade. So I propose that 12 hours of training time is a risk worth taking. At worst, that cognitive training will lead to improvements in emotional well-being and cognitive fundamentals. Complicated challenges are never simple to solve, but the best solutions are always the simplest ones. Let me know if you'd like to explore this approach to help give your students a better start in life. I talked about the Evolve Logic model last week, and one of the points that I made is that schools should be focused on more than just exam grades. The new Ofsted framework now has a much greater focus on inclusion. Now, whilst this is welcomed, we still don't have wider performance measures that schools can aim for, especially for those 1 in 3 children who fail to leave school with what's regarded as a good pass in English and maths. I believe that wellbeing, mindset, and performance grades would be far more useful in the real world, and also they'd be more motivating for many children and young people. Mark Zuckerberg opened a school, and he wasn't bound by the same financial restrictions that many schools in the UK are. And what did he do? He employed just as many non-teaching staff as teaching staff. So how can we help schools to become centres of excellence for childhood development? Well, this is something that the Department for Education should be thinking more about to make it easier for schools to do what's in the best interests of their pupils and their teachers. As a country, whatever we're doing now, it isn't exactly working that well. 33% of students not leaving with a good pass in English and in maths, and 15% of 18 to 24-year-olds are currently not in education, employment or training. And these statistics haven't been impacted by AI just yet. The economist John Kay wrote a book called Obliquity, and he gives reasons why directness often fails, especially when the challenges we're trying to solve are complex. If we focus on wider development goals, such as well-being, mindset, and performance, and take a less direct approach to English and maths, we may end up surprising ourselves. Please let me know in the comments below or with a direct message if you'd like to introduce this concept to complement your education provision.